The speaker for this evening is arriving any moment here. Till then, I am going to keep you engaged. All the viewers watching online, bear with us. The speaker today is come from USA. He doesn't know about the Madras traffic actually. So, it should never go by the Google time. But he's coming. He's almost near another 5-10 minutes. He'll be here. We'll start the program on time. But we also have the moderator, Mr. Gopal Srinivasan is already here. He's coming there. And before that, I thought I'll brief you as usual what's happening in MMA so that you go. And I also show some lovely videos about MMA, 2-3 minutes. By the time, I'm quite sure that speaker, Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, will be here. Tomorrow, 10th of August, we have an event on discussion on the book Unconquered Horizon, Southern India's Resistance Icons. What we are doing, we are talking about so many leaders who have done some phenomenal work as a modern corporate leader, as a leader otherwise the warriors. Here we are getting a leader who has done exceedingly well as icons, and to discuss that we have got an outstanding panel. Captain Ramachandran is a veteran, and Nandita Krishna, she is a historian, environmentalist, and also founder of CP Art Center. We got Air Marshal Matheshwaran, one of the finest fighter pilot, test pilot. Then we also got Rear Admiral Dingra, who is a part of flag officer commanding of Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. So it's going to be a very lovely discussion tomorrow evening. Please do come at evening. This we are doing jointly with Colors of Glory. You know, Colors of Glory is a great organization. Does some phenomenal work in projecting the achievement of great armed forces personnel from all the services, not only armed forces personnel, other than all the uniformed services. They do a fantastic work. We are collaborating with them and doing this. Then 17th of August, we have another interesting event, Solving India's Solid Waste Crisis, Lessons from Madurai. And it's a seminar starting from 9:30. You think we are starting doing this along with the Sundaram Climate Institute. We have Mr. Lakshmi Narayanan, Chancellor of, Chairperson of Kriya University, delivering a keynote address. And we also have Prasad Modak. Prasad Modak is again Environmental Management Center Limited, and also he's from Pune. He's supposed to be authority on this subject. He's coming all the way from Pune to us. We got Nalini Shekhar, Executive Director of Asiru. She's there. She's coming from Asiru Dala. She's coming from Bangalore. We got Anjali Bansal. Anjali Bansal, most of you know her. She is also the Independent Board of Directors, Tata Power, Nestle, and also partner of Avana Climate and Sustainability Fund. And we have Dr. Vasudevan, founder of Tyagaraja College of Engineering, and Srikanth Balachandran. We got Som Narayanan. We also got a couple of startups who have done a lot of work. Sushil Vaishnav and Mridula Ramesh. Mridula Ramesh is the founder of Sundaram Climate Institute. We are organizing jointly with Sundaram Climate Institute. Mridula will be the one who is actually behind this, and she is there. And also Ashwin Mahalingam, Faculty, Department of Engineering. And he is also joining us. He will be moderating the session. Mali, you can take your place. Can you put a chair, another chair? Yeah. Then tell him to put one more chair there. Innu chair put it, don't you? No, keep sitting. No, inga Mali, put that chair. Yes, so till he comes, I thought I'll keep you engaged. So this by invitation, idea is we are getting all the people who are involved with NGOs, CSR, then who have done some work similarly in the field, because this is an area where we are very weak, solid waste management, and because it really impacts the environment, and that's why we are doing. Madurai done some phenomenal work. Yes, Raju, please come. Done some phenomenal work in this area, so we want to showcase what exactly is done. Please do come. This is by invitation. You are interested, please give a call to MMA, and they will try and register you if there any vacancies there. And then on the 18th of August, we have the Madras quiz. We jointly do with Murkappa Group. Sumant C. Raman is the quiz master. He's got some attractive prizes. You want to know the best of quizzing? It's one of the best quizzing happening in Chennai during the Madras Day celebrations. Please do come, and it's happening on 18th of August at Chennai here from morning. This is happening in the afternoon, 3 o'clock onwards. Then 19th, we have another interesting event, demographic dividend, boon or bane. This was supposed to happen on the 12th, but we had to postpone it on the 19th because due to some unavoidable reason, the speakers had to travel. We got Ramasundaram IAS, he's a Tamil Nadu cadre IAS officer, and you must have seen him writing regularly at Hindu and various newspapers on population control, right? And then we have Suresh Babu, director of Madras Institute of Development Studies. Then we have Professor Mahalingam, professor from Bharatidasan Institute of University. So they'll be sharing the thing. This is a subject which is very, very relevant to us and also relevant to the corporate world. Democratic, David, how you can make use of them in terms of your labor forces, in terms of your leadership teams, in terms of so many things get involved with this. Please do come. It's happening on 19th of August. Then we have on the 20th. Again, a very interesting event. Interesting event is preparing the mind, brain for leadership. This we are doing, I think we are talking about Krishnamurthy is here, and we are doing joined with Buddhi Clinic. I think Mr. Krishnamurthy is a knowledge partner for this event. Please come, sir. Take your seat. And this is happening on 19th. We have this is happening on the 20th. Krishnamurthy will be talking on this subject. We have Mr. Annadore will be sharing the session, who is some executive director of Indian Oil. Then 27th, we have Read and Grow as usual. This is a book on which we are going to be discussing is Mental Models, 30 Thinking Tools that Separate the Average from the Exceptional. It's again a very carefully chosen book. This is what is happening this month. I also got lovely events already fixed up for the month of September. One major event, what's happening in September, you have to listen to me because the author is coming on the way. So you have no choice. And once in a while I get a chance to keep telling you more about MMA. I'll keep doing this for another 2-3 minutes. I think it'll be here any moment. Cabin Care MMA Chinni Krishnan Nomination Award. It's happening next month, September. Please block your diary. And there's also icing on the cake is we're also launching a book on that day. It's all written about Shashay world and all about Mr. Chinni Krishnan, how he really did this. A book written by the family. It's happening at IT Research Park. Please do come for this event. Now, I have to keep you engaged for another 2-3 minutes. I thought maybe I'll keep you engaged with some. You got some nice MMA video? You can put about MMA video. 2-3 minutes, you'll be coming. I think we have an interesting evening. I think it's worth the wait. 2 more minutes. Once again, very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As assured, the speaker has already arrived. 2 minutes, I said, he's arrived in one minute. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hand together to welcome the speaker for this evening, Professor Krishnamurthy Subramanian, and to moderate and lead the conversation we have Mr. Gopal Srinivasan, Chairman of Managing Director of TVS Capital. May I request you please to take your place on the dais, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, very warm round of applause to our distinguished speaker. And before I request Mr. Mahalingam, President MMA, to deliver a formal welcome address, let's briefly tell him, you all know about him very well. He's a distinguished alumnus of NIT Trichy, IIM Calcutta, with over 35 years of experience. He's a transforming leader, impactful investor of TS Mahalingam Sons. May I request Mr. Mali to please come and deliver the welcome address. Mr. Mali, welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Nice rainy evening in Chennai. It's indeed my pleasure, privilege, honor, and I would add extreme joy, as a matter of extreme joy, to deliver the formal welcome address on the occasion of the discussion on the book by our distinguished author, Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, on the topic India at 100, Envisioning Tomorrow's Economic Powerhouse. I said extreme joy for the simple reason that I think all of us in India should feel extremely joyous, because look at what's going on in the world, and the optimism, I think, that is happening in India is quite unique for us, and we should be very happy about it. That's why I said extreme joy. And the topic of this book actually plays on that, the optimism that all of us are feeling. And I thought it's important that we feel happy about this. And it's indeed for me to express my feelings apart from pride and pleasure and joy. The feeling of beyond the pride is a conflicting emotion of awe. Proud that I'm sharing stage and welcoming such a distinguished gentleman on stage. Shri Krishnamurthy Subramanian, earlier Chief Economic Advisor, now Executive Director, IMF, author of this book. So it's really goosebumps moment for me. Thanks, Krishnamurthy. Thanks. Mr. Gopal Srinivasan, Chairman, Managing Director, TVS Capital, and many more things for us in this part of the world and the country as entrepreneurs. Thanks, Gopal, and thanks, Christian, for doing this at MMA. It's really, we are proud at MMA that you're doing this here. It's indeed an honor for us, and we're really looking forward to this evening. At a personal level, I have a connect with both in a very direct and indirect way. I'm proud to say I went to the same institute as Krishnamurthy Subramanian, IIM Calcutta. It's indeed an honor for me. He went in much later, but I think around 11 years later. I was there in 87. So, and at a personal level, my niece and my good friend Rajiv there went to Booth. So there's multiple connections with you in that way. Okay, so, and the orbit is because there's so much brain power on stage and his audience and the people watching this. So I'm really overawed by the situation. But as I said, rarely do you have a combination of all these emotions. Pride and awe are conflicting, but the fact is it is. That's how I feel right now. As far as Mr. Gopal Srinivasan goes, what should I say? Beyond the title of that, I think he's a beacon of hope and influences how entrepreneurialism and venture capital happen in the country. And many of what is happening today, even in the recent budgets, are thanks to the evangelizing of Mr. Gopal Srinivasan. At a personal level, I've known him for some time, and I admire him a lot, and he's a well-wisher of our family. Thanks, Gopal, for doing this for us. It's really... Pleasure, Mali. Yeah, thank you so much for... And the beauty about Gopal is when I called him just some 8 days back, and he said, if it's Subbu and it's the occasion is this, I'll be there. He didn't even hesitate. I said I can't say no to Mali. Oh my God, that's not... Thanks, Gopal. A bit about MMA. We founded in 1956, a few numbers just basically. 8,000 members, 8 branches, 14 times winner of the Best All India Management Association for over the last few years. So that's about MMA, and I wish to welcome all the delegates who are present here, all of those who are watching online, our members, etc. I think we are in for a real treat. About the book, I don't know to say much because I'd leave that to Subbu and Gopal to discuss. But from what I understand, it's the little that I understand of it. I've never understood economics even, and I am Christian. So I'm understanding some of it through what your book is right now. It envisions a very, very optimistic future for India, and with detailed research, lays out the priorities, the policies, and the path forward. So when I read it, I'm sure I'll learn a lot more about macroeconomics than I ever learned in campus. So I'm really looking forward to it. So the book is, I think, is going to be available here, and it's already available here, Vijay Kumar. Yeah, so it's available here. I wish to welcome all our past office bearers and presidents to this wonderful occasion. I'd like to just say one thing, and finally, I would like to say this one thing is that normally we have had good discussions on management topics or business topics where the author is somebody who has been an observer of events. Here we have somebody who's been in the thick of this, basically, making this happen. So the story over the last few years, I think Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian has been an architect of many of things that are happening today. And between him and Gopal, who's been part of this great story that India is becoming and is bound to become, we have on stage two people who are not mere observers but very active actors in the process. We are really privileged to hear it from them, because hearing it from the people who actually do it is very different from people who observe it. Thanks again, Gopal and Krishnan, for doing this. I think all of us at the end of this evening will be for surely wiser, but more importantly, we'll be more optimistic about the future, and we might even get to know what we need to do to make this happen. Thank you, Krishnan and Gopal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mali. Before we formally launch the book, let me have the privilege of introducing distinguished speaker for this evening, and also Mr. Gopal Srinivasan. Start with Mr. Gopal Srinivasan. Gopal Srinivasan is the chairman and managing director of TVS Capital Funds, TCF, managing about 2,000 crores across three funds since year 2007. The third generation member of the TVS family. He has founded and scaled more than 10 ventures and played a pivotal role in shaping India's VC and PE policies. Gopal has served as the chairperson of the Indian Venture Capital Association and also the governing council member of Reserve Bank Innovation Hub, and he holds MBA from University of Michigan and the BCom from Loyola College. Very warm welcome once again, Mr. Gopal. Pleasure to have you for this evening. Let me have the privilege of introducing our distinguished chief guest, author, whom we are all looking forward to listening this evening is Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian. Krishnamurthy Subramanian is an executive director at the International Monetary Fund and professor at the Indian School of Business, and also, as mentioned, and India's 17th chief economic advisor from 2018 to 21, 3 years. He was applauded by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi for his academic brilliance, unique perspective on economics, policy matters, and reformatory zeal. Hailed as a common man's economist, and ideas like V-shaped recovery and behavioral economics and of the nudge have captured public imagination. One of the most popular chief economic advisors we had was there. Now we have a momentous occasion. May I request Mali also join us on stage. We'll have the official launch of the book. May I request Mr. Gopal? Please come. The planned format, we leave it to Mr. Gopal Srinivasan. Otherwise, we request the author to speak for about 20 minutes. What made him do this? Thereafter, there will be a fireside chat led by Mr. Gopal Srinivasan. Then, audience questions. The question slips and pen is available. We are not planning to give the mic because of shortage of time. Write your questions. All viewers watching it online, the number on the screen. Please send your questions. We'll try and accommodate as many questions as possible. Over to you, sir. We'll set the context, what made him write the book, then you read the context.
Okay. Very good evening to all of you, and thank you very much, the MMA and all the office bearers, esteemed office bearers. Gopal, in particular, Gopal has been a friend and a supporter over the last several years. So thank you very much to all of you, all the esteemed guests who have gathered here to hear about this labor of love, India at 100. So just to give you a little bit of background, two thoughts have led to the crystallization of, in the form of India at 100. Firstly, I have believed that for positive outcomes to manifest, positive thinking is necessary. But for negative outcomes to manifest, negative thinking is sufficient. Therefore, there is the need for credible positive thinking about the Indian economy. And India at 100 is an effort to do that. I have not built a castle of dreams. I've actually laid it on a foundation of what I think is sound economic logic and data. As a researcher, I have been trained in the Sherlock Holmes philosophy of theorize only after you have the data. And that is the philosophy I've taken to the book as well. The idea for the book came about when I was in the last few months of my stint with the government. The celebrations of India at 75 were happening. Having had the privilege of writing 3 economic surveys, 3 volume ones, each of which focused on a particular theme. The first one, the 2018-19 one, on the economic strategy for India to become a $5 trillion economy. The second one, 2019-20, on the importance of ethical wealth creation for the Indian economy. And the third on the post-COVID economy. My thoughts naturally gravitated towards what India will be when it turns 100, in its centennial year. And therefore, the thoughts that had come together in the interim period so for a short while I was back just as a pure academic, from January of 2022 till October, when in November, when I assumed this current responsibility. So that 10 months was a period of a lot of, reflection, introspection, and reading, helped bring some of the ideas together. And then, as it turned out, my family did not move with me because my son was still finishing up his school. So they didn't move till May, so that, when you're alone, you get to do a lot of work as well. So, and then last few months, fructifying this. So, let me explain the bottom line. I'm estimating India to be a $55 trillion economy if India can grow at 8% in real terms from now on till 2047. So, of course, many of you will find this goal to be audacious. Some of you may even be thinking, whatever he's been smoking, I want a piece of that. But let me explain to you, I have not been smoking anything. There is economic logic underlying, and I think especially the power of compounding. Very often we do not understand the power of compounding. There's a story in the book as well in the second chapter which illustrates that. For want of time, I'm not going to go into it. But let me start by giving you one example and, maybe trying to elicit from you some opinions. So let's take Japan from 1970 to 1995. 25-year period. What do you think was the increase in the GDP, Japan's GDP, over that 25-year period? Just to sort of anchor numbers, let me share with you that Japan's GDP in 1970 was $215 billion. How many times do you think Japan's GDP multiplied over this 25-year period? Let's have some responses. How many times do you think Japan's GDP multiplied in the next 25 years from 1970 to 1995? 100 times? If it were 100 times, it would be 25 trillion. The largest economy in the world, US, is 22 trillion. So, I want some numbers with conviction. Please don't throw numbers just out of the hat. 40 trillion? 40 times? Okay, this is a very optimistic audience, I must say. 15 times, okay. 20 times? 10 times, okay. Good. I think this is, at other places when I've actually tried to elicit a similar response. Yesterday, in a dinner that Gopal had organized, there were responses like 3 times, 5 times, and, the reality is, Japan's GDP multiplied 25 times. 25 times. From 215, the phone is actually active, so I better check that. So from 215 billion to $5.1 trillion in a 25-year period. During this period, the GDP per capita increased from 2,100 to 44,000. Their inflation fell from 8% to 1% during a period when many of the advanced other economies, global economies, went through a period of hyperinflation following the oil shock. And its currency appreciated from 350 yens to the dollar to 85 yen to the dollar. In other words, about 4 times appreciation of the currency. Now, I am not assuming any appreciation of the rupee. I'm not assuming, but modeling and thereby predicting that in the next 25 years, the rate of depreciation of the rupee is likely to be significantly lower than what it has been historically. Historically, the rate of depreciation of the rupee has been about 3 to 3.5% per annum. But this has been during a period when India's inflation has been about 7.5% on average. And one of the fundamental tenets in international economics is that even if, let's say, the real value of the currency remains the same, real value meaning the ability to buy, in purchasing power parity terms. So if I want to buy this mic, how many mics can I buy in $100? Vis-a-vis how many mics can I buy in 100 rupees? That's basically in purchasing power parity terms. Even if there is no change in that, if there is a decrease in inflation, the rate of inflation of the rupee, there will be a decrease in the rate of depreciation of the rupee. Why? Because in order for the real value to remain the same, a currency where inflation is higher, the real value reduces faster. And so in order to offset that, to keep the real value the same, the currency has to depreciate more. So with 7% plus inflation, about 7.2, 7.3% inflation, the depreciation has been about 3 to 3.5%. Now, in 2016, and this is a year when India's, I'm sure in India's centenary year, there'll be a lot of anthology, a lot of history that'll be written about India's, economic history. 2016 will mark as a very important year because this was the year when the inflation targeting regime was put in place. What that requires is for the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, to deliver inflation of 4%. Target of 4%, but there is some scope for them to actually, because they can't, deliver exactly 4%, scope of plus minus 2%, so between 2% to 6%. And if you look at the average since 2016, the inflation that has prevailed, from 2016 to March of 2024, the average inflation has been 5% precisely. This is despite COVID and despite the Ukraine war. And despite the fact that advanced economies during this period have faced anywhere between 2.5 to 4 times their historical average inflation, India, in contrast, compared to its historical average of 7% plus, has delivered 5% inflation. Therefore, going forward, it's a very reasonable expectation that within this range of 2% to 6% that the RBI has to keep inflation, assuming at the higher end 5% is a very reasonable expectation for inflation. So if depreciation was of the rupee was about 3.5%, with inflation being 7% plus, with inflation declining to 5%, the rate of depreciation should go down by at least 2%, and therefore 1% is a very reasonable rate of depreciation of the currency. As I said, my anchoring example was Japan, where there was 4 times appreciation. I'm not assuming any of that. I'm assuming, let's say, 1%. In fact, less than 1% in the book. But for the purpose of, illustration here, without a board, without any chalk paper, I'm actually going with 1%. Let's look at the numbers then. 8% growth in real terms. So if we can grow at 8% in real terms, as I said, that is one of the most important elements of this, of this journey. 8% growth in real terms, add 5% inflation. 8 plus 5 is 13% in nominal rupee terms, right? In order to estimate the rate of growth in dollars, we have to subtract the rate of depreciation, because depreciation reduces the value in dollar terms compared to rupees. So subtract 1% rate of depreciation, as I have just argued, that is what is likely to prevail. So 13 minus 1 is 12%. Now, I'm sure, there are many people here who indulge in markets and therefore do these calculations. There is what is called the rule of 72, which is the number of years it takes to double your money. And recall back to the time when the NSE certificates actually used to double your money in 6 years, because they paid 12% rate of interest. 12 times 6 is 72. That's your illustration of the rule of 72. So if the dollar rate of growth is 12%, as I just mentioned, nominal rate of growth, 12 times 6 is 72. So GDP doubles every 6 years. Over the 24-year period from 2023 to 2047, therefore, there will be 4 doublings. In 2023, India's GDP was 3.28 trillion, precisely. Let me reduce it a little bit to 3.25, so that I can work with, relatively round numbers, So first doubling from 3.25 to 6.5. 6.5 to 13 is your second doubling. 13 to 26 is your third doubling. And 26 to 52 is the final doubling, which is close to the 55 trillion number that I gave you. 52, I've actually, we've done mental calculation here. The precise number is 55. In other words, the most important element in this is 8% growth. Let me use the same exercise to also illustrate why the 26 trillion, prediction that global consulting firm Ernst & Young makes is, in my opinion, is likely to be an underestimate. 7% growth, let's take 7% growth in real terms. Add 5% inflation, 7 plus 5 is 12 in nominal terms, nominal rupee terms. But instead of taking the 1% depreciation, which should be the result of the lower inflation, let's take the rate of depreciation to be what it has been historically the case, which is 3%. So 12 minus 3 is 9%. So if the rate of depreciation continues to be what it has been in the past, then dollar rate of growth will be 9% in nominal dollars. So GDP now will double every 8 years. 9 times 8 is 72. 24-year period, 8-year doubling. There are 3 doublings. 3.25 to 6.5 to 13 to 26. That explains the 26 trillion. So in other words, one of the most important, this, as you can see, just the difference of 2% here makes a big difference. This is the power of compounding. So 55 trillion, and let me just, summarize this with a parallel which hopefully, even if you don't remember these numbers, I hope you will remember this example that I'm going to give you. As is my, wont, I'll give you an example from cricket. I'm sure all of you here remember Sachin Tendulkar breaking into the scene, starting, his first series to Pakistan in 1989. And that broken nose, Waqar Yunus, Imran Khan, and Wasim Akram is legendary. And then we know in 1992 he goes to Perth, after he's already scored his first century at Edgbaston, he goes to Perth and hits that wonderful 100. Everybody's wowing about him. Sunil Gavaskar in 1993, if I remember right, makes a statement. He says, by the time Sachin finishes his career, if he does not score 40 international hundreds at least, and at least 12,000 international runs, I will personally go and strangle him. I will be old, my hands will not have as much strength, but I will still try. Now, this was a paternalistic statement, a fatherly statement that marked the potential that Sachin had. But this was a potential that was assessed based on past performance for the last 3 years. There is an important learning in there for the Indian economy. Having seen the performance of the Indian economy over the last 30 years, especially the last 10 years, based on that, and I'm no Sunil Gavaskar, by the way, not even for the Indian economy, but based on that, one can assess the potential that there is, for 8% growth. And if 8% growth happens from here on till, and I see what good reasons we can talk about that in the discussion, we will be a $55 trillion economy. So that potential. There's another important learning, I think, which is even more important, which is that just because Sunil Gavaskar assessed that Sachin is going to score 40, should score 40 international hundreds and 12,000 runs, his 15,000 plus runs and 100 international hundreds did not happen just because Sunil Gavaskar said it. Sachin had to work really hard. He had to overcome his setbacks like the tennis elbow, creatively come up with solutions to setbacks and black swan events like that. There is an even more important learning in that as well. The Indian economy will have to work hard. State governments and central governments will have to work hard to implement good policies to deliver the 8% growth. And also, the black swan events that will inevitably come during a 20-25 year period, come up with creative solutions like we did during COVID. To be able to, if we do that, we can be the Sachin Tendulkar of the global economy. Thank you.
I think, you meet many people who want to put their country first. In fact, most people you meet want to put the country first. But to do it with this optimism and this enthusiasm, I think is just fabulous. I would request you to give another round of applause. We had him home last night and he had to go somewhere else. We started a bit late after a very heavy, carb-heavy South Indian dinner. And he started at 9 o'clock. And it was amazing. Not only did he keep going with enthusiasm, but so did the audience. And that is, I think, the power, Subbu, of your optimism and also your intellectual rigor. Because what I loved about looking at the book was the way the data was analyzed. I would love each of you to go through that. The academic rigor was simply outstanding. I now understand why your thesis didn't win one award for the best thesis in America from the AFA, but also won the Kaufman Award for a thesis across 12 different sectors. And that I can see today.
Thank you.
In going through the book, there was so many different points, and I just loved all of them. Italy, zero cost of compliance. I think I couldn't really believe that. I'm told that at the same time I saw other extremes, like, for example, in America, the SEBI equivalent has one employee for every listed firm. And in India, there's one for 6 listed firms. I hope we don't catch up with America, honestly. And there's some really, really amazing facts here. I think the thing I wanted to just start off with was basically to ask you, when you were CEA, I still remember your phenomenal survey where you talked about thalinomics. I think you invented that word thalinomics. So for the sake of this audience, in very simple thalinomics language, what were the 4-5 building blocks beyond the dollar-rupee appreciation or depreciation rate that you had in mind?
So, before I actually speak about the pillars, Gopal, I think it's important that I share a little bit of the background that I come from and which which is an aspect that oftentimes drives my economic thinking as well. My father here, lost his father when he was 7 years old, finished SSLC. He didn't have the privilege to be able to go to university, but he made sure that me and my brother, had the opportunity to get education. So, I have had the opportunity to be able to see the common person's life. Almost my entire childhood grew up in type 2 railway quarters. So when I was a CA, when I got a type 7 railway quarter, I really missed my father. If he had been there, I would have been so happy to see that. I think it's that aspect, and that is why, and I've genuinely felt, having learned economics is a discipline that, on the one hand, is extremely important. Each one of us in our own families has to do this. But at the same time, each one of us thinks that we know fully, we understand economics fully. The nuance in that is something which is many times missed. Therefore, it is important to be able to explain economics to the common person with all its nuances. So the effort that I've tried to make is to be able to use examples that common, each one of us, even from non-economic backgrounds, can relate with. To be able to, Thalinomics idea was along the same lines, because nothing more common than a plate of thali or plate of food. We encounter that 3 times at least in a day, and using that to have a conversation on inflation like that. So in a similar way, let me attempt to the 4 pillars. In a democracy, it is important for the necessary support for good economic policies and structural reforms to happen. It is really critical that the benefits of growth spread far and wide. Therefore, one of the pillars, of the 4 pillars in the, in India's economic strategy, I have placed social and economic inclusion. And social and economic inclusion driven by jobs. Again, here, the emphasis on jobs, it comes from my own personal experience. As I said, if my father had not gotten a job, in the Indian Railways, for a good part, he was basically in the non-gazetted cadre, retired as a gazetted officer. But I can do the counterfactual and say, if he had not gotten a job in Indian Railways, I wouldn't have even been 1/100th of what I am today. Let alone being able to actually share my thoughts with such an esteemed audience. In other words, in one generation, because of the impact of, that formal sector job, the kind of social and economic inclusion, just phenomenal. I mean, think about it. I don't think, I would have been even able to have come close to 100 meters of of the MMA when I was basically maybe, 35, 40 years. So in other words, I was socially excluded. But with the power of education, with the power of what a job provided, that social and economic inclusion has enabled. I think it illustrates the importance of jobs for social and economic inclusion. And that is why, given the very young demography that we have, young population, some of the experiences, some of the privilege that we've had, and many of my family members also had, other families need to see the same as well. They need to live the Indian dream too. And I think that is where the social and economic inclusion is important. I use that phrase because when I was appointed as the chief economic advisor, one of the news outlets actually ran an article, says living the Indian dream. So I think that is really important. The second, which is, actually the first pillar, because macroeconomics always comes first from a perspective of economics, is the focus on growth and growth alone at the macroeconomic level. The reason I can just say focus on growth, leave out the part of and growth alone, because good policy making requires absolute clarity in thinking, clarity of thought. Having been part of government, I cannot emphasize enough what the first Nobel laureate in economics, Tinbergen, coined as the Tinbergen rule, which is as many instruments, so many policy goals. The reason I say this is Many times when we have conversations on things like tax policy, we try and hobble that with multiple objectives. Tax policy should be about efficiency, not about trying to do socialism using tax policy. And tax is the most critical part of ease of doing business. So in the report that we had in the, as part of the direct tax code, I actually wrote a chapter about what should be the objective of tax policy. Like that, other examples. The reason this is important because at the global level, advanced economies, there is this conversation that is happening on inequality. Many of us, and in the media, you read about inequality a lot. But like, some of our musicians or music directors, in Bollywood, who would basically just take a jingle from Hollywood and just transplant, Hindi lyrics onto it. Many times, today our intellectuals also do the same thing, which is take one of those narratives that is prevailing in the West and just transplant it here without thinking about whether that is equally applicable for India or not. And that is why it is really important when we think about the conversation on inequality. There's a chapter there. In the advanced economies, there is a negative correlation of inequality with socio-economic indicators. In other words, higher inequality translates into lower socio-economic indicators. But that is not the case with India. And that is why our focus on growth and growth alone should be basically at the macroeconomic level. At the same time, wealth creation, and this is, in my opinion, if there is one mindset change that is required in India, it is about the way we think about wealth creators. Given our socialist past, we think about wealth creators only as a necessary evil. We do not think about them as enormous contributors to society. Let me draw on again a personal example here. When we were young, living in Bilaspur at that time, so we were a lower middle class family. We used to have this house help who used to come and help us. Sometimes, some months, we couldn't afford it, but some months she would come. So she would come to help my mother with doing the dishes, just that part. This house help would also work with 9 other families. So she was washing, dishes in 9 other families. In other words, effectively, a lower middle class family like ours, which was not creating much wealth for sure. In fact, we were basically depending on railways to provide us a job. We were not creating that much wealth, was creating 1/10 of a job. 1/10 because 9 other families. In contrast, the local jeweler in that town, Bilaspur, was a wealth creator. He was basically, was wealthy, he used to employ about 100 employees between his business and home. So in terms of quantity of jobs compared to the lower middle class family, which was hardly creating any wealth, this wealth creator was creating 1,000 times as much jobs, number one. Not just that, while we were basically, providing 1/10 of a job to a house help, this wealth creator was paying, salaries that were for these jobs actually at least 2 to 3 times that of a house help. In fact, more, maybe 5 times. So not only in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality also, he was creating jobs. And this is important. I'll say this, that, I do not hold a candle for any industrialist in this country, because not 1 rupee have I earned by actually doing consulting for any one of them. Therefore, I can speak with absolute conviction that what I say is in the interest of the country, in the interest of the economy. I'm not holding a candle for any industrialist. But the fact remains that no industrialist, puts his rupee bills basically in a mattress or in his pillows and sleeps with that. What does he do with the money? He puts it basically in the companies. And those companies provide jobs. I'm sure, of the people who are here, maybe 5% might be working in a government job. Each one of you possibly has either worked or is working in a private sector job. Where does that job come from? It comes from a wealth creator creating a company. And yet, because of many demagogues to whom basically we allow them to pull wool over our eyes, we basically, they create this artificial, tension between what is good for the citizen and wealth creation. The reality is there is no tension, natural or artificial. You need wealth creation in order for employment to happen and thereby social and economic inclusion. This is a mindset change that is absolutely required. And finally, the fourth pillar, which is virtuous cycle driven by investment. Because if you look across the last 100 years, the last 1 century, every country that has grown at 5% plus growth rate in real terms, not just for 1 or 2 years, but over an entire decade, they've done that by investing more. And therefore, investment is absolutely critical. These are the 4 pillars for India to have not only high growth, but growth that is equitable and the benefits of which spread far and wide and create employment, thereby ensure that in a democracy we can have such high growth.
Fantastic. I think the 4 pillars are really, really powerful ideas. But Subbu, I'd like to double click on some of it. It really sounds fantastic. And I know this is not Alice in Wonderland. So I just want to de-hallucinate some of the feelings that some of us may have and understand your mindset. First, let's take the 8% growth, right? It's a very basic assumption that you put in place. Now, when we look back, and one of the guests who came for dinner last night sent me a WhatsApp saying, in 1999, India's GDP was 458 billion. And pretty much we have doubled every 7 years, roughly. So let's assume that it's possible. But I want to take 2-3 other things. For example, in India, the democracy is noisy. It's got other aspects which you alluded to.
Yes.
So we're assuming that changes can take place. Every day we see a new government, which is a coalition, struggle with simple things. They cannot do stroke of the pen changes.
Yep.
Secondly, you talk about credit growth,
Yep.
going from 58% to 100+%. Maybe, and yet yesterday, the governor, when there was a small change in credit deposit ratio for some banks, where it went up in his mind unfavorably, he made huge amount of noise about credit expansion. This is not very, very proper. And lastly, whenever there is any change in the dollar, I know that the Reserve Bank cannot control the dollar rupee price, but they try to manage it to some extent because they keep talking about managing it to the float or the dirty float to ensure that fundamentally, quote unquote, the export competitiveness is not lost. So we cannot do stroke of the pen changes. We seem to have a Reserve Bank that frowns upon credit expansion in some sense. We have basically their ability, their desire to manage dollar rupee. Can we really still manage 8% growth with all of this noise?
I think that's an excellent question. Let me build on what you yourself said, Gopal, that we've doubled GDP every 7 years, and again using the rule of 72, we've done that by growing at about 10% in dollar terms. So I think that gives me the confidence. If we, as I said, this 10% growth, in GDP over the last 20 years, 10% dollar growth, it has happened during a period when the rate of depreciation of the currency has been about 3.5%, right? A reduction in the rate of depreciation, as I said, to less than 1%, that gives you already a 2.5%. So instead of 10%, we can grow at, you add that 2.5% to 10%, we get the 12.5%, which is what we need for doubling of GDP every 6 years, leading us to the 55 trillion economy goal. So I think it is certainly doable. What I'm not asking, and yesterday or maybe some, I think one of the events, somebody possibly said, what is the tapas we need to do to grow at 8%? I said, we don't have to do any tapas and all. We've been growing at 7% on, approximately. From 7%, we have to go to 8%. It is ambitious, but it's a reasonable stretch goal. But it is not a goal where I'm saying basically that, tomorrow I should go and win the wrestling competition in Olympics. That's not what I'm asking for. I don't have to lose weight either. So it is something which it's a stretch, and stretch goals are important. Research in psychology also shows that a little bit of a 10-20% stretch is something that goads you to work harder, and this is that stretch goal. That said, though, I think some of the challenges that you've talked about, I think, are absolutely well taken. We are a democracy. And here, I actually want to take this opportunity to therefore highlight, we are a federal structure. And, in a federal structure, states and center both have equal roles to play. when we look at some of the narrative, when, for instance, let's say this, and by the way, let me make it very clear, I am not part of the government now, and so I'm not speaking for the government or against or none of that. When I say the central government, I'm not part of that. The fact remains that when it comes to governance, power and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. So if, for instance, states say, oh, you are actually taking away, by doing, let's say, education, or by doing land or agriculture or whatever, you are getting into my territory, I think in the same breath, we also need to say, if you talk about your power by saying, oh, you're stepping onto my shoes, let's ask them the question, are you fulfilling your responsibility? Agriculture is a state subject. Have you reformed the farm laws that seem to continue to, since the 1960s, only benefit a few? For all the rhetoric about farmers, has it benefited the small farmer? Have you done the changes? What about your responsibility? And we need to be asking these questions, because it's a very welcome development that, we immediately after the budget, not only when I was there, but even after I've left, we ask a lot of questions from the union government, which we should, absolutely. But we should be equally asking questions from the state government as well. In fact, I suggested yesterday in the CII session that CII, and Gopal is here, one of the important members there, have a session after the state budget as well. Important state budget, unravel that state budget, read it through fully, ask questions, tweet on the social media, and push basically the state government as well, equally. Let's not cut slack. Let's make the state government equally responsible for policy change, especially from manufacturing perspective. We are sitting at the hub of manufacturing in this country, right? And what does manufacturing require? Manufacturing requires these factor inputs, which is land, labor, capital, logistics, power, economies of scale. Of these, how many of these are actually at the state, are state subjects? Land is certainly one. Labor is also another. State has an important role to play. Power certainly, because if smart meters are not employed and there is power pilferage, that leads to power for corporations basically going up. Scale, economies of scale. Many times firms don't grow because incentives are very perverse. Many of these are in the state domain. Are we asking the question when the budget comes, what are the reforms that have happened? Why does it need to be the case that reforms need to be asked only from the central government? What about reforms from the state governments? What about reforms from the state governments? Our media friends, when are they going to start writing editorials asking the states to do reforms? When are they going to write after a budget, why isn't there reforms there? Important questions, we need to be asking these. And we need to, as citizens, we need to be actually, when our media friends do not do what they need to do, we need to be highlighting them. Today, social media gives us that power, that democratic power to actually go and say, if media outlet X has basically given cut slack for the state government, let's go on Twitter and put it out. Important. These are important for for a democracy like ours. At the same time, we also have to make sure on credit creation. I think here again, mindset change is important. You talked about the credit deposit ratio. If we look at credit creation in the Indian economy, in 2020, our private credit to GDP ratio is 58%.
Yes.
58% is the private credit to GDP ratio. What is the global average? Global average for private credit to GDP ratio in 2020 would be about 130, 140%. This average of 58% prevailed for the globe in 1960. Think about it. By the way, there's an important lesson here. We need to, as citizens also, look at more the other countries as well, saying, and push our government saying, if other countries can do it, why can't you do it? So global average for credit is 60% in 1960. We are 6 decades behind. And the reason is because still almost 93, 94% of credit in the Indian economy is collateral based. This is in a country where 60% of the economic value added comes from services. which does not have too much assets. So one of the important changes that is required in credit creation is cash flow based lending. Cash flow based lending. We now have the digital infrastructure, the public digital infrastructure to be able to enable this. Another important change here is that we shouldn't be hung up on, if 20% growth is happening in whatever variable, that is too high. It may be too high basically for, at a much higher scale. But when something is starting out 20% growth, this is something, you are in the VC business, Gopal, actually, even 50% growth for startups, you are not happy with that sometimes, right?
20% will be very worrying as it's so low.
20% is very worrying because startups started a low base. So I think these kind of important mindset changes are really critical, in order for us to, I think in general, the way I would say is that we need to be thinking carefully, thinking with clarity, not just cut-paste stuff that happens from other countries, to design policy that really is well suited for India, and remove blinkers that we have. Many times we have these blinkers. It's important to remove these blinkers.
And I think fast, especially at Mint Street, I think we have to get some changes as the next decade rolls in. I have just a couple of double-click questions, and I hope we're getting questions from the audience because we'd love to have them. But I just want to double-click on 2 points that you've raised. You've talked about federalism. Now, a state in India, like Tamil Nadu, is the size of a large European country. There are states in India which are the size of a continent also in terms of population, 200 million. And yet, this is a country where we do not have municipal or municipality level democracy. We do not have district level democracy. We don't have panchayat level democracy. I understand that a panchayat president and vice president jointly are allowed to sign a check for 100 rupees or 200 rupees. So the administrative officers appointed by the state government are ruling all the way. Tell me, if I'm living in this area or any other area, I have a house in Tiruvannamalai, I reflect a lot there in terms of how it's being administered. Can any of the changes that you're talking about happen if the districts and municipalities and villages do not have an elected government, and instead you parachute in somebody from some other part of the country who has a 24-month stint? Without that, can any of these changes happen? Should this be a fifth pillar? Rajiv Gandhi tried, and in 1989, the 64th Amendment he tried, and he lost with 400 seat majority in Parliament. Yeah. Of course, he did do the 73rd, but that was not a bit diluted compared to the original one. What are your thoughts on how do we reform the grassroots and bring in a third level of democracy in this country?
I think this is a phenomenal question, Gopal. I really like that question. Let me share, yesterday when I was actually, when I was trying to rush to your home, and so I was actually coming from Kanchipuram. I was about an hour away, and I see that we are about 30 kilometers away. 30 kilometers away, and Google Maps is showing me that it's going to take me 1 hour to travel 30 kilometers, actually even less than 30 kilometers, about 26, 27 kilometers. And I was just quickly comparing, because for the last close to 2 years, I live in the United States. I was thinking that to travel 20 kilometers, in the United States, I would do that. That's about 15 miles. I would do it basically in, about 20 minutes. Now, the question so automatically came to my mind, how do we get state governments to actually become responsible? And I was wondering, why is it that our pace is so slow? Because there are roads, actually some parts of the road are shambolic. Absolutely shambolic. So the thought that came to my mind is, why don't we start tracking and using Google data? It is possible now to see what is the average speed, among all the major cities, and thereby put state governments, or at the same time, also put the average speeds in other international cities and say, hey, and now this is my response to your question, because social media gives us that democratization. Why shouldn't basically, we get the data from Google Maps, say in Chennai, for instance, the average pace is basically, and that is reflective of the quality of the roads, the average pace is maybe just 20 kilometers per hour, while, maybe, and maybe Bangalore is just 15 kilometers per hour. Mumbai maybe is not very different, 20 kilometers, put that out. And also put out basically saying, for every politician who talks about, I'll make this city a Singapore, or I'll make that city a, Copenhagen or whatever, put that data, and this is something of the state government. Contracts for basically road construction, local road construction, and this is not NHAI doing it.
Subha, I just want to interrupt here. Just like everybody looks to the PM and says you should do something, change. Here we look at the CM. But for example, many of these roads are within the Madras Corporation limits.
Yep.
And yet the mayor doesn't exist, has no power. Now, if the mayor was aware, he would probably be able to spend time on this issue. And that is my question. The mayors of South Korea and Taiwan and China have become the heads of politburos and prime ministers.
Yes.
Today, the mayor of Chennai is not shall we say, an upward mobile job.
Yeah. No, I think that is I'm conceding that, Gopal. What I'm actually, this is a question that would be far better answered by a politician, because they would know, I would like to ask the chief ministers themselves that why are you not willing to delegate power to your
Absolutely.
lower down? That's
From
a question.
the SFCs.
I am not in a position to answer that question, but what I can still say is there is, even if that does not happen, we still can actually, as citizens, put pressure to ensure that, in my opinion, if basically this becomes an important issue that, matters in the elections, I don't know how many MLA constituencies there are in Chennai. If all the citizens start saying basically that, our vote depends on how fast we're able to travel, why should we have for us to travel 30 kilometers to work, why should we have to spend 2 hours? It basically, if you reduce it to 30 minutes, I get to spend basically, 1.5 plus 1.5, 3 hours with my family. I can spend 3 hours with my family. My vote depends on that. Don't you think, even, with the current status itself, without the mayor, don't you think that will be an important issue? In my opinion, yes. And that is what social media gives us the power to. So, in other words, this is important, especially at and the reason I highlight this, Gopal, is that we, if we have to get brains back from many of the, the quality of living in our metros needs to go up. And one of the most important determinants of quality of living, in our metros is just the travel time. Another idea, why can't we have staggered work, for instance? Now, post-COVID, we have actually online meetings. So some offices start at 6 o'clock in the morning, some others start at 10 o'clock in the morning, then some others start at 2 o'clock, and some others start at 6. So that everybody is not basically, going to office at the same time, and then you're basically getting clogging at 8 o'clock and in the morning and 6 o'clock these are ideas, I think, which can definitely be done. What requires is some changes in the relevant act. And I'm sure the bureaucrats basically, if we put pressure, in my opinion, I think in the urban areas, travel time has to become an important election issue, because every minute that we save in travel time is time that we can spend with our families.
And your next stop is in Bangalore, right?
Yes, I'm dreading that. I'm really dreading that.
There are a lot of excellent questions, and I'm just going to combine a few of them from the audience. In your book, a lot of examples of comparison, should I say, from China. And also in our normal business narratives and discourse, we often say, I went to China, it's like this, I went to China, it's like that. Very, very common in our own internal conversations, right? But I'm just thinking about the fact that whether really we should think of this country more in the scale of China, or we should think of it more in the manner of Brazil. Brazil, like us, noisy democracy, lots of changes. China went on and on and on, but Brazil basically completely got stuck in the middle income trap, which we all know about. Here also in India, we find very strong distortions in wealth. I think the top 3 individuals in India are more wealthier than the GDP of Singapore, is what I saw in the paper today. Oxfam reports galore about 1% and of the people owning all the wealth and so on is there. So isn't there a danger that in this growth, because of our democratic structures, there will not be a continuity of policies, and we'll actually end up more like Brazil rather than China?
I think that's a good question, Gopal, and this is something that I anticipated, and therefore there's a chapter on the middle income trap. And I think the example that you gave of Brazil is very apt because when you look at countries that have been stuck in the middle income trap, it is mostly the Latin American countries. There are important lessons there. In contrast, countries, not just China, and I think we don't need to restrict ourselves to China. If you look at many of the East Asian economies have been able to grow their GDP per capita significantly and not be stuck in the middle income trap. There are important lessons there, and I think, of course, the importance of the political establishment realizing the importance of reforms and us citizens also highlighting the importance of reforms at the state level, I think I cannot overemphasize. That said, though, from the economic perspective, leave the political aspects aside for other experts to opine on. On the economic aspects, there are important lessons. When we look at countries that have been stuck in the middle income trap, these are countries that could not graduate from their earlier model. If you look at any of the Latin American countries, these primarily they were they use a lot of primary activities, which is actually which is sort of, let's say, using raw materials, exporting, not as much of some secondary, but not as much tertiary either. And those models, so though the elite that benefited from those, from pursuing business models, in those, they ended up becoming very powerful and thereby inhibiting change when the country wanted to move on and therefore reduce or take away whatever support they had provided to industry in order for such growth to happen. These vested interests actually block because that this is something that will hurt them. And I think there's a very important lesson in there for India, which is that we have to take, for instance, the PLI scheme, and it was introduced, I was part of the government when it was introduced. But any support scheme should continue for a while, but it should not be ad infinitum. I think that is important because support should be provided to children. Support should not be provided to dwarfs. We, as parents as well, think about it. I want to give you this example. Let's say us as children, or maybe think about our own children. If basically the child knows that even when the child is 40-year-old, we're going to support them economically, will that child ever make the effort to study and become self-efficient? No. So implicit in, what do? We basically have the expectation is that by equipping yourself, you will become self-sufficient. It's like, think about when a child is learning to cycle, we provide them the training wheels. If the child knows that the training wheels are going to be there all the time, they will not learn to, cycle properly. The child knows that those training wheels are going to be taken away. Similarly, with support as well, economic support, till the child grows to become an adult, it should be there. But if the industry knows that this is there forever, they will not invest in becoming more capable. It's a very important lesson in it because this is what has made the Latin American economies stuck. The industry that benefited from these policies, they became a powerful interest and thereby inhibited and wanted to protect their turf, did not allow subsequent reforms to happen, a risk that we have to be aware of. Similarly, when it comes to actually, I think judicial reforms are important because rule of law enforcement is actually is an important aspect. There's a literature that actually shows both the necessary and sufficient conditions to avoid the middle income trap. The sufficient conditions are the combination of these three, which is manufacturing sector growth, which is another secondary sector, productivity increase, and rule of law. These are the three that are sufficient for a country to avoid the middle income trap. India needs to be definitely aware of that.
That's great. I think there is a stark difference, as you pointed out, between the natural resource type of Brazil and a kind of more service industry, knowledge industry, yes, manufacturing like in India. Is absolutely fantastic point. I just want to combine again a few questions. There's a lot of concern in the audience, and I'll take three of their questions. One is, how do we actually make sure that young people in India are motivated to fight the good fight? We all, in my mentor C.K. Prahalad always said, entrepreneurs are the nation's freedom fighters. for social and economic freedom.
Yes.
But the word fighter, kshatriyatvam, is a very important word. Not everybody is born a kshatriya in their heart and mind.
Yeah.
So how do we create the kind of resilience and strength in people to want to be an entrepreneur and to have the thrills and spills of being one entrepreneur? The other question is also about, do the labor laws, the kind of laws around venture capital funding in India, where PF, for example, is not allowed to invest in venture capital funds, really set of enabling laws encourage such entrepreneurship? Do we need reforms in labor laws? Do we need reforms in pension fund laws? And the third question, I think, is also around the fact that everybody is going to college, and there are lots of wonderful college kids here asking some really smart questions. And they're all worried that what they're being taught in college is something that was created by, old men and maybe women as well. But right now there's AI, there is this whole talk about a global workforce that is fungible, there is talk about cyber security and threats, there's robotics, there is gene editing, there is synthetic biology. How are we actually equipping this generation to live up to the expectations you set in the book?
I think, great question. Let me take your last question first, because this relates to youngsters. And, I'm myself an academic, and a teacher. But let me reflect on myself as a student. Let me not reflect as a teacher, but as a student. When I think back to what is it that, that education gave me two things really. One was the ability to think independently, which is, and without blinkers. And in some sense, this is what I really got from the education, which is that realizing that even someone like a Wasim Akram can bowl full tosses. In other words, just because a Nobel laureate had said something doesn't mean it is right. I have to, given my education, given my training, I have to understand it and then see whether it basically is correct or not. So that independent thinking, is something that education taught me. Second, which is in some sense related, is the ability to think ab initio. Ab initio is a Latin word which is basically to think from first principles. I'll give you an example. When COVID happened, for instance, what we had learned, all of us had learned, in grad school and in business school. When I say grad school, I mean PhD. Is that a crisis is something that reduces demand because people's earnings are affected. But I remember actually, agonizing around March, April 2020 for a while, and many times I distinctly remember getting up at maybe 2 o'clock in the night thinking, what is this crisis about? And sometimes, maybe 50, 60 seconds, there will be some worry. Then I'd say, let me go and read. About 2-3 weeks, basically, it took me time to understand that it's going to be a big supply side shock. Now, at the level of economics, demand and supply are fundamental elements. So the ability to, in some sense, not use blinkers just because in the textbook theory told us, just because previous researchers said that every crisis is a crisis to demand, not taking that at face value. Saying that if, for instance, this is the first time in a crisis, governments are asking people to stay back home. People are locking down the economy. That has to mean something. That doubt in my mind, I think that doubt is also important. In some sense, I think what I want to say is that education should also make you aware of your ignorance. Why am I saying this? Because, you and others may be thinking, the question was about artificial intelligence and what is this prof responding? If you're thinking along those lines, let me connect the dots. Not only artificial intelligence, but in the next 25 years, there'll be some other new things that will come. When you learn how to learn, then when new things come, you can learn. And the fundamental building blocks to Learning how to learn is the ability to think ab initio, is the ability to remove blinkers, and more importantly, the belief that just because this is new, I don't have to be ignorant about it, I can go and learn it. That is what an education is supposed to provide. I think it's important to understand the difference between education and training. You get trained to do AI. You get trained to maybe, use a typewriting machine. You get trained to maybe go and operate the lathe machine. That's different from, education. I think this is a fundamental aspect we have to understand, and I'm saying this by reflecting as a student. The tools that give you the ability to learn all through your life, that is what an education provides. And that is what, if you are lifelong learners, there will be new things that will keep coming. We'll continue learning.
What about the resilience and entrepreneurship?
Yes, I think that's so see.
Are we all getting very comfortable with social media and being the world's largest YouTube watchers and Instagram reelers?
So in general, a general point I want to say, whenever we talk about any statistic about India, please make sure that you normalize it by the population or you normalize it by the GDP. For instance, there were, during the election time, there were these, things that the debt is this much in rupee terms. Do a simple thing, normalize it by the level of the GDP. People say, oh, there are so many people, who are basically leaving for other countries. We are a 1.4 billion population. Normalize it by the population. I think this is something, absolute numbers in and itself, without normalizing by population, are meaningless. That's the first thing too. So if we have, largest YouTube population basically seeing YouTube, it's also the case that we are the largest population too. So do we have as a percentage terms? I think that's a question to ask. Let's say, suppose that as a proportion of population also, let's suppose we have the largest. If that is the case, let me still respond to the question. I think what is important is, see, every powerful tool can actually be used for constructive purposes, can also be used for destructive purposes. Take something like fire. If we don't light a fire, we cannot have food. But the same fire can be used for arson as well. And one can keep giving examples like this of all innovations. I think the people who basically are, I'll go back to today, for instance, is social media. When I was growing up, I know my father used to be really worried about the corrupting influence that television might have. I'll share a story. This has to, even if I'm sort of stretching time a little bit, have to share this story. Me and my brother, we actually used to watch cricket. So, around exam time also, we never wanted to miss a game. So what we used to do, our father's office was very close by. So, he could walk, actually, it was just a 5-minute walk. So the deal that between me and my brother was that, 5 overs, I will sit and watch, without getting interrupted. He will be sitting at the door where he's seeing whether Appa is coming or not. And then after 5 overs, we will basically interchange. And, we used to start out basically with this deal, but as soon as 10 overs was bowled, we forgot about the deal. Both of us would be watching. On one occasion, we were not lucky, and we see actually both of us are, staring into the television, and there is our father standing there. I don't remember, I must have been close to, doing natural phenomena stuff at that time. So, but I remember my father saying...
But the question was also more on, do they have the steel backbones and the fiery ambition?
I'm coming to that actually too. So my father at that time basically said that, TV order chuda pore. Venda. The ayave venda. In other words, these tools and more tools will come. What we need to really make our kids appreciate is there is no other formula in life that I have or you have or any one of the successful people that I've discovered here is hard work. If anybody thinks that you basically can learn, or you can achieve stuff without working hard, I think they're actually having a pipe dream. That's the first thing to emphasize, most important. And that formula never changes, whatever the new whatever new thing comes. Second, the importance of resilience, which is actually, and I don't know how many of you got a chance when the Indian, when India won the World Cup, I wrote a piece in the Times of India and talked about the importance of learning from failures. And I think, I can tell you, if there is a person in this room who actually can raise their hand and say that they've not failed, either they are God or they're lying. It's an important aspect of life. And I think, just to give an example, yesterday my son was he's trying to implement, he's a first year student, doing computer science. He's trying to implement an, AI model. And the model was he said it's not working at all. It's doing stupid things. He seemed really frustrated. I told him, this is what this is the point of the internship you're doing. You want to learn how to deal with the failure. And I think this is a really important part that, we need to tell our kids to be able to deal with failure. Failure is just an event. We need to learn from that. I think that's what builds a lot of resilience. In other words, the fundamental virtues that, or old-fashioned virtues, the environment can change, but these virtues remain as germane. And actually, I'm saying, of course, based on many of our personal experience, mine as well, but Gary Becker, the Nobel laureate in economics in 1992, has written research papers on this, showing that old-fashioned virtues actually, whether it was for my father's generation or my grandfather's generation or my generation or my kids' generation or our grandkids' generation, these old-fashioned virtues will remain important. It is basically the tools will change, but these virtues, we need to keep running them again and again. I'm sure, Gopal, your son basically goes to IIT. So I don't think I can, some of your skills you should put out basically how did you manage to basically, competition is intense. I'm sure he dealt with when he would have been going for coaching, he would have dealt with a few failures himself. So these are the important things that really we need to be teaching our kids, that if you're going to be just seeing YouTube, then when exams come, the exam marks come, obviously you're going to be disappointed. In some sense, the aspect of, delayed gratification, that is really important, to be able to instill into our kids and generation. And I think all of us, especially, without appearing like tatas, basically giving, we have to try and, inculcate these aspects in the kids.
My father told me when I was very young that if at least 100 Indians are not better because of me, I have completely failed in my life. And that sort of stuck with me. I just want to ask a question. There's an old saying, right, that criticism is like the rainwater that stays on the leaves of the tree. It slowly drips to the bottom and nurtures the tree when the rain has stopped.
Yep.
So in that spirit, somebody is asking a question about you. During peak COVID time, economists were shouting from rooftops that when the Western world was spending a big percentage of the GDP as relief package, you were stingy and that would take India deep into trouble. But you are very confident of how you are handling it and proved later to be correct. So there is in some sense a criticism and then there is a praise. Where did that optimism come to you in the midst of such an overwhelming catastrophe that was happening in the middle of the COVID era?
Thanks for that question. It gets me emotional. If ever I write my autobiography, the first chapter will be this. I remember, on the 31st of August of 2020, I, gave an interview to Rajdeep Sardesai. And Rajdeep, remember this was the time, so this was the lockdown quarter. GDP had declined by 24%. And as Gopal and, whoever asked this question certainly would remember, the eagles were out, especially in the media. So he says, historic decline in the GDP, and blah, blah. And then I said, there's a V-shaped recovery. What was behind that? So, couple of things. One, as you would recall when I took over as the chief economic advisor in December of 2018, growth was declining. And there were a lot of narratives actually at that time, including some who, who at that time were part of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister, who said India is stuck in a middle income trap. That is why growth is basically declining. There were others who actually said other policy measures that led to, but what I was convinced about was this growth decline was only because of the crony lending that we had done and the overhang of that. I was absolutely convinced there was nothing structurally wrong with the Indian economy. Because, we had implemented policies just then. A few years back, we had implemented the IBC. There was the RERA that was implemented. Lots of reforms had been done. The financial inclusion program of more than 500 million people had been done. There was basically a cleanliness program that was being done. We had covered in the economic survey as well how that was improving health outcomes. So I was seeing all this, and so I was not persuaded at all. And in many of my early interviews, even before COVID, I said there's nothing structurally wrong with the Indian economy. Many people didn't believe at that time, but I was absolutely convinced. This was one element. Second, and this is something, as soon as lockdown happened, what we did was, and a lot of credit goes to a phenomenal team that we had of young, assistant directors and deputy directors. These are Indian Economic Service officers in the Ministry of Finance. I took a lot of care to create this team that was called Team CEA. On a side note, the deal to them was that even the advisors or senior advisors who are joint secretary, additional secretary level people will need appointment to come and meet me, but you can walk into my room. But on the flip side, I can call you at 2:30 in the night as well. I might have work. That was the deal that I struck with this team. But so it was a phenomenal team. This team, of course, I thought it is important. So I asked them to go and start tracking about 60 high frequency indicators on a weekly basis. And what we used to do was, starting from the lockdown itself, on Monday morning, we would see what was the level of the indicator last week, what was the level of the indicator this week, what's the change. And we would share that with the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Finance Minister, and many of the senior cabinet ministers, so that we were tracking the economy not after a couple of months, but every week. And this data, putting this data together really helped, together with my assessment of the economy. So what I was seeing was, yes, during the lockdown, many of these indicators, e-way bills, power consumption, many of those were basically first trending down, but they started trending up as well as the lockdown was removed. And so I was actually seeing the V in the data at that time because of these, high frequency indicators, the 60 high frequency indicators, combined with the belief that there was nothing structurally wrong with the economy, that the 24% decline was only because we had restrained economic activity by doing the lockdown. Then I said, okay, as the restrictions on economic activity are taken out, obviously, the GDP will come back. And that's what led to the V-shaped recovery. It was, I will tell you, after having talked about the V-shaped recovery, one of the other questions then Rajdeep comes up with he said something to the effect of, famous economists like XYZ are saying that this government does not know how to handle the economy, etc. I responded by saying, by the way, one can prepare for economic questions, but one cannot prepare for ad hominem attacks like these. So you have to respond on the fly. And this is on obviously live. So I said, Rajdeep, you're a fan of cricket, so am I. So I'll give you a parallel. Sachin Tendulkar, Shane Warne and Wasim Akram were great bowlers, but even they bowled full tosses. I'll leave it at that. So
Well put.
It was a very difficult period. I think the lesson that it also helps. The other, I think, let me share some private thoughts that I had at that time. Was I 100% confident about a V-shaped recovery? No. I can say I was maybe 75%, 80% confident of a V-shaped recovery. It would be a lie if I say I was 100% confident, because during a time, and especially when everybody is saying, and people are saying, things that are very negative, you also try to incorporate, and I was not 100% confident. But I also, this is the third thought that went into my mind, which was that when an individual is down, it is very easy to kick. That doesn't require any leadership to do that. But when an individual is down, to actually pick that individual up and say, saying, no, you can do it, that is actually what displays leadership. And given the vantage point at which I was at that point in time, I said, even with the cost of tomorrow, let's say, if the V-shaped recovery doesn't happen, obviously there'll be egg on my face. But I said, at this point in time, it is my responsibility to display that leadership, that I am not going to kick. I will basically, go and build spirits. So, of course, credibly with data, but at the same time, this was a sentiment that eventually.
And before I ask my last question, which is, I think, the complete unanimous question from everybody in the audience, telepathically transmitted to me, I want to just thank everybody for their questions. I think we haven't answered all the questions, but great questions, especially from the young students. Do read the book. I have been able to glean some of the knowledge of the book, and I'll tell you my secret how I did that. So you will find many of the answers. I flipped through the book and in fact saw most of the infographics, which is what I still like reading comics, so I read infographics first. But the quality of the infographics, the quality of the insights, the organization of the chapters is phenomenal. So you will find this answers to your questions and much, much more when you read the book. And now to the last question, which has been telepathically sent to me by the audience. Have you received a call from the Prime Minister's office, and what's next for you?
I'm so inclined to say that with friends like you, I don't need any enemies. But let me, honestly, Gopal, see, given the kind of background that I come from, what gives me the maximum satisfaction and which is what, I do it passionately, is actually to serve the nation. Because
I think that one line says it all, Subbu.
Thank you very much.
I must also thank my colleague Mani, who helped me to put this together. Thank you, Mani.
Thank you. Thank you. I think one of the finest lectures we had for a very, very long time. A big round of applause to, and especially what he said about son and father. In today's thing, in a later moment, is the father must be waiting for son not to come back, because the son comes back, they throw him away and start watching Netflix actually. But today is different, and we have over 980 viewers watching it online. Thank you for so many questions. Unfortunately, you read the book and many questions have already been answered. Now I request Mali to please come onto the stage and present a moment on behalf of MMA. May I also request, we are going to give you a copy of the book. I got few copies from Rupa. Thanks to Rupa publication and also ISB. Please come. I request the committee members to come and pick up the copy so that the author agree to sign. Mali, please. More book to read. And a book release the you can pick up a copy complimentary from MMA. I got few copies. First come, first served. Please, the author is kindly agreed to sign all the copies and look forward to seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you.
But your hand is so beautiful. You have learned from you. All the questions come. I sent only 50